So how many validators do you sort of expect to see on the Beacon chain?
To launch the chain, currently it's like 16,000 validators to launch. And there's a nuance here. I'm going to discuss that. We expect in chain operation eventually to have 200 to like 400,000 validators. And the terminology here, I think, is a bit confusing, and I try to make it clear when I talk about it, that a validator is a consensus entity. It is a entity of 32 ETH that has its own keys, so it can sign things, and it's assigned to do things in the protocol. A user very well, and a node that a user is running very well may have any number of validators on it. And so usually, I think in other proof of stake protocols, we have this notion of, you know, a validator can probably have like any amount of stake weight, and usually like a validator runs on a single node and has like a single signature, and it just has a certain weight applied to it. But because we are randomly sampling validators across all of these shards, the accounting becomes, one, much easier if we can kind of just think of them as like contiguous units and run them around. That's why they have the 32 ETH requirement. And to get safe committee sizes through this random sampling mechanism, we need to have a number of consensus entities to sample across. And which I think many proof of stake protocols don't have this requirement. And so they don't really have this like notion of splitting up the duties so granularly.
Why can't someone just have one key, but like, you know, they can, I feel, why link this sampling process to the actual keys that the people are managing? Like, why can't I just say that, okay, look, my total stake is, I'm running, you know, 32 times 12 or 32 times 100 by ETH stake, right? Why do I actually have to manage 100 physical keys instead of the protocol just like, you know, treating it as 100 pieces and then saying, okay, you know, you have to, you know, on this epoch, you're assigned to these 30, you know, you happen to be on these 37 shards, and on this one you have four your signature has a weight of 4. Like, why add all this extra overhead by adding so many keys?
Right. So the primary overhead you get here, assuming that you're still randomly sampling the validators and like you're kind of splitting them up into logical entities, you're still going to have the message overhead in both on the network level and in the processing. The primary thing that you gain there is you're going to have a reduction in like the state size from storing all these validators, but that's really not like the primary bottleneck. Even on the order of like 300,000 validators, you're talking about like 30 megabytes of core system state that doesn't grow unbounded. And so it's
but also computation time. So let's say my node is running with like 10 signers I have to be assigned to this shard and have 10 nodes. I don't have to do all that BLS aggregation locally. I could, you know, just send out one signature.
So you're saying I'm like 100 consensus entities. I happen to be assigned to 3 shards, the three of these same signatures across the same shard. Then I can like pre-aggregate. You could also pre-aggregate if you have different keys.
But well, I'm saying, what if I just used one key, I wouldn't have to pre-aggregate at all. I could just send out my one signature, so I don't have to waste time pre-aggregating.
And ultimately, there's a lot of like little trade-offs here, and I think early on we decided that the complexity of the consensus complexity of randomly shuffling and be able to think of everything as different units of about the same weight was easier than building in these like shuffling mechanisms where we have like validators of larger weights and stuff. I didn't actually ever design the protocol that way, and so maybe that assumption is like slightly incorrect. But it's been, I think the ease of just like tossing validators around in the protocol was certainly one of the decisions there. And I think most of the overhead, I think you don't necessarily get away with by going the other path. And it's more of like consensus complexity, and there might be like minor optimizations, like you pointed out, that come in each direction.
When it comes to the
signing's not our bottleneck. Signature verification is certainly a bottleneck. It's really not. It hasn't shown in current testnets to be like the major issue. But signing, even like if I run 10,000 validators on a single machine, like signing is really not the issue right now. So fortunately, it hasn't become the issue.
This was brought up on Twitter, which is like, how do you prevent somebody with a ton of stake weight to kind of just like spread that out into various different validators and like stake 32 ETH like across the board, and then if you're doing like a random sampling,
that is what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Huh?
So they can. We make an assumption that there's not an attacker of larger than 1/3 size, and so the random sampling has to large enough committee size has to do with the assumption that, okay, we have a 1/3 attacker, and we're going to be splitting all of these consensus entities randomly across these committees. What are the chances that a 1/3 attacker would get a 2/3 majority of a committee? And again, regardless of whether you have them stacked on a single validator and you're kind of splitting them into logical units, or you actually have them in separate units, this kind of assumption that we're making here still holds. And so we have our committee sizes are like target 128. They can actually be larger. And again, taking a 1/3 attacker, randomly sampling them into these committees of size 128, the chances, and there's some biasability that can come into randomness, which randomness is kind of an interesting problem. I want to hear about what y'all use for randomness. There's like a 1/2 chance that a 1/3 attacker would randomly get 2/3 of a committee and thus be able to corrupt a committee. But corrupting committees and like this, assumption about a 1/3 attacker and this assumption about how biasable randomness is, like this is a crucial component of these two. And if we have, in early, like if this assumption fails and committees can be corrupted, then like, we're back to the drawing board. So this is crucial.